Chapter 1. The Cat Cafe Charm. Helen Carlisle had always believed that happiness smelled like freshly ground coffee beans and sounded like the soft purr of a contented cat. Standing behind the counter of the Cat Cafe, she inhaled deeply, letting the rich aroma wrap around her like a warm hug. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily past the wide front window, where three tabby kittens tumbled over each other in the glassed-off playroom. A handwritten sign read, "Adopt Love Here." The cafe was alive with chatter, laughter, and the occasional meow. Neon pink and black cat ears perched jauntily on the heads of her baristas, who darted between tables with trays of steaming lattes and pastries. Helen adjusted her own headband, slightly crooked, and smiled. This was her kingdom, her dream, and, if she was honest, her safe little bubble. 2 caramel macchiatos and a tuna treat for Mr. Whiskers, called Marcy, her newest hire, balancing drinks like a circus performer. Helen chuckled. "Coming right up. And remind Mr. Whiskers that tipping is appreciated." Marcy grinned and disappeared into the crowd. Helen turned to the espresso machine, her hands moving with practiced grace. She loved this rhythm, the hiss of steam, the clink of cups, the hum of conversation. It was chaos, but it was hers. Near the window, the older couple, Edna and George, sat in their usual spot beneath the brass plaque that read, "Reserved for our favorite lovebirds." Helen had insisted on the plaque after they confessed they'd met in a bookstore decades ago. Now, they were her unofficial cat adoption ambassadors, armed with catnip and charm. 3 adoptions this week, Edna announced as Helen passed by with a tray. "And George says we'll hit 4 before Friday." George winked. "We've got our eye on that ginger rascal. He's a heartbreaker." Helen laughed. "You two should be on commission." "Darling," Edna said, patting Helen's hand. "We just want everyone to find love. Cats, people, it's all the same." Helen smiled, but the words tugged at something deep inside. Love. She'd been too busy building this dream to think about it. 31, single, and perfectly fine with it most days. Other days, like when she saw couples sharing lattes and laughter, she felt a pang she couldn't quite name. The bell above the door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. A man stepped inside, shaking snow from his dark hair. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a camera slung across his chest. His eyes, gray, like storm clouds, swept the room before landing on her. Helen's breath hitched. Not because he was handsome, he was, but because he looked lost, like someone who didn't belong here, in this cozy chaos of cats and caffeine. "Welcome to the Cat Cafe," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. "First time." He nodded, his smile slow and warm. "Yeah, I heard this was the place to be." "Well, you heard right." Helen gestured to the menu board. "Coffee first, cats second. Unless you're here for adoption." His gaze flicked to the kittens tumbling in the playroom. "Maybe both." Helen felt a flutter. Ridiculous. Really? She was not the fluttering type. "What can I get you?" "Black coffee," he said. "Strong." "Coming up." She turned to the machine, willing her hands to steady. It was just coffee. Just a customer. Just a man with a smile that made her stomach flip. Behind her, Edna whispered loudly to George, "He's handsome. And single, I bet." Helen shot them a look. They grinned like mischievous matchmakers. She set the cup on the counter. "Here you go. 1 strong black coffee." He reached for it, and in that moment, because fate had a sense of humor, Helen's elbow caught the edge of a syrup bottle. It toppled, splattering caramel across the counter and onto his sleeve. "Oh my God!" Helen grabbed napkins, mortified. "I'm so sorry." He laughed, a deep, easy sound that made her cheeks burn. "No harm done. Adds character." Helen dabbed at his sleeve, aware of how close they were, of the clean scent of his cologne. "Seriously, this never happens." "Sure," he teased. "You spill coffee on all the newcomers?" She met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to gray eyes and caramel stains. Then Marcy called, "Helen, we're out of oat milk." Helen stepped back, flustered. "Duty calls." He smiled, lifting his cup. "Thanks for the coffee. And the entertainment." As he walked to a corner table, Helen felt Edna's gaze like a laser. The older woman mouthed, "Go talk to him." Helen rolled her eyes, but her heart was racing. She didn't even know his name, yet. Chapter 2. Enter the stranger. Helen Carlisle prided herself on being unflappable. She could handle a morning rush with one hand tied behind her back, soothe a cranky kitten with the other, and still manage to whip up a caramel latte that could make angels weep. But the man from yesterday, the one with storm-gray eyes and a laugh that lingered, had unsettled her in ways she didn't care to admit. She told herself it was nothing, just a customer, just a moment, just a smile that had replayed in her mind all night like a song she couldn't turn off. The bell above the door jingled, and Helen looked up from the pastry case. Speak of the devil. He was back. Same camera slung across his chest, same easy confidence, though today his hair was damp from melting snow, curling slightly at the ends. He scanned the cafe, his gaze landing on her like a spotlight. Helen's pulse did a ridiculous little skip. She pasted on her best professional smile. Welcome back. Black coffee, strong. His mouth curved. You remembered. I have an excellent memory, she said, reaching for a cup. Especially when caramel syrup is involved. He laughed, and Helen felt the sound ripple through her like warm honey. Fair enough. No spills today. Not if you behave, she teased, then immediately regretted it. Flirting? Was she flirting? She was not a flirter. She was a responsible business owner who wore cat ears for branding purposes, not seduction. He leaned on the counter, gray eyes dancing. I'll do my best. Helen busied herself with the espresso machine, willing her cheeks to cool. So, she said, because silence felt dangerous. What brings you to our little corner of the world? Passing through. Sort of. He glanced around the cafe, taking in the neon ears, the cat playroom, the cozy chaos. I'm a travel photographer. Was supposed to head to Chicago, but my car decided it needed a vacation. Transmission blew just outside town. Ouch. Yeah. Mechanic says it'll be a week, maybe 2. He shrugged, like being stranded was no big deal. Figured I'd make the most of it. Helen slid his coffee across the counter. Well, welcome to Maplewood. Population, 5,003 cats. He grinned. I like it already. Before Helen could respond, Edna materialized at her elbow like a matchmaking fairy godmother. Hello, handsome stranger, she said, eyes twinkling. I'm Edna, and this is George. She gestured to her husband, who was waving from their plaque-marked table. We're the welcoming committee. Helen groaned inwardly. Edna? Oh, hush, Edna said, patting Helen's arm. We just want him to feel at home. The man, Alex, Helen reminded herself to ask his name, smiled warmly. Appreciate it. And if you're looking for company, Edna added, Helen here knows everyone in town, and every cat. Helen shot her a look that could curdle milk. Edna beamed back, unrepentant. Alex's gaze flicked to Helen, amused. Good to know. Helen cleared her throat. Enjoy your coffee. He took a sip, then winced. Hot. Comes with the territory, she said, fighting a smile. As he moved to a corner table, Helen tried to refocus on her work, but her eyes kept drifting back. He sat with his camera on the table, scrolling through photos on the screen. Helen caught glimpses, snow-dusted streets, a frozen lake, a close-up of a cat peering through frosted glass. Her cat, Mr. Whiskers, looking like feline royalty. Helen blinked. He'd been taking pictures yesterday? Of her cafe? Of her cats? Marcy sidled up, grinning like a teenager at a boy band concert. He's cute. Helen glared. Don't start. I'm just saying, Marcy whispered. Tall, dark, and artsy? That's like the trifecta. Helen rolled her eyes, but her stomach did a traitorous flip. She was not interested. She had a business to run, cats to care for, bills to pay. She did not have time for storm-eyed photographers who laughed like sunshine. Still, she found herself drifting toward his table under the pretense of wiping down counters. He looked up as she approached, and Helen felt that ridiculous skip in her pulse again. Everything okay? She asked. Perfect, he said, then tilted the camera so she could see the screen. Hope you don't mind. I took a few shots yesterday. This place is something special. Helen leaned in despite herself. The photo showed the cafe bathed in golden light, cats lounging like tiny monarchs, customers laughing over steaming mugs. It looked magical, like something out of a magazine. Wow, she murmured. You made us look amazing. You already are, he said simply. Helen's breath caught. Compliments were fine. She could handle compliments, but that tone, warm, sincere, made her feel like he saw more than just a quirky coffee shop. She straightened, flustered. Well, thanks. He smiled, slow and easy. I'm Alex, by the way. Helen, she said. Carlisle. Nice to meet you, Helen Carlisle. Before she could reply, a shriek split the air. Helen whirled to see a calico cat streaking across the cafe, tail high, eyes wild. Behind it, a toddler toddled in gleeful pursuit. Oh no, Helen muttered, sprinting after the escapee. Chairs scraped, coffee sloshed. Customers laughed as Helen dodged tables like an Olympic hurdler. The cat darted under a booth, then launched onto the pastry case in a blur of fur. Marcy, Helen shouted. Close the playroom door. I'm on it. Marcy lunged, nearly colliding with a man carrying muffins. Helen reached for the cat, missed and stumbled, straight into Alex. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. For a breathless moment, she was pressed against him, her heart pounding like a drum. Got you, he said, voice low. Helen's cheeks flamed. Thanks. The cat chose that moment to leap onto Alex's shoulder, claws digging into his jacket. He didn't flinch, just laughed, steadying Helen with one arm while stroking the cat with the other. Guess I've been adopted, he said. Helen stared, torn between mortification and something else, something warm and dangerous. Looks that way, she managed. By the time the cat was returned to the playroom and order restored, Helen felt like she'd run a marathon. She sagged against the counter, watching Alex settle back at his table, The cat incident apparently nothing more than a funny story to him. Edna appeared at her side, smug as a cat with cream. He's perfect, Helen groaned. Edna, don't fight fate, darling, Edna said, patting her hand. It has claws. Helen laughed despite herself. But as she glanced at Alex, camera in hand, smile easy, she wondered if Edna was right. Maybe fate did have claws. Chapter 3. Small town gossip. Helen Carlisle had learned 2 immutable truths about Maplewood. 1. Cats could sense fear. 2. Gossip traveled faster than a runaway kitten. By the time she unlocked the cafe the next morning, the whispers had already begun. She could feel them humming in the air like static electricity. Edna and George were perched at their usual table, sipping tea with the smug serenity of people who knew things. Dangerous things. Helen tried to ignore them. She had muffins to arrange, beans to grind, and a mental list of tasks longer than a Maine Coon's tail. But Edna's voice carried like a church bell. Did you hear? Edna said, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. The photographer Alex, he's staying at the Maplewood Inn. Room 3B. Helen froze mid-muffin. Room 3B? Why did she care? She didn't care. She absolutely did not care. George chuckled. And apparently he's single. Widowed? Divorced? Nobody knows. But he's got that brooding look. Helen groaned inwardly. Brooding? He'd laughed yesterday. Warm? Easy. Like sunlight breaking through clouds. That wasn't brooding. That was charming. Which was worse. She ducked behind the counter, hoping to escape notice. No luck. Edna's radar was infallible. Helen, darling, Edna called. You should invite him to the fundraiser. Helen straightened, clutching a tray like a shield. What fundraiser? The one you're planning, Edna said sweetly. For the shelter cats. You mentioned it last week. Helen cursed her big mouth. It's not official yet. Well, make it official, Edna said, eyes twinkling. And make sure Alex is involved. He looks like a man who loves animals. Helen opened her mouth to protest, but the bell above the door jingled. And there he was. Alex. Storm gray eyes, camera slung across his chest, snow melting on his boots. He smiled when he saw her, and Helen's heart did a ridiculous somersault. Morning, he said, voice warm as fresh coffee. Helen managed to smile. Morning. Black coffee? You're good, he said, leaning on the counter. But today, I'm feeling adventurous. Surprise me. Helen blinked. Surprise him? She specialized in lattes, not life-altering decisions. Caramel mocha? Sounds perfect. As she worked the machine, she felt his gaze like sunlight on her skin. Not intrusive, just curious, comfortable. And that was dangerous because comfort led to conversation and conversation led to feelings and feelings led to busy morning? He asked. Helen glanced around. The cafe was buzzing. Students hunched over laptops. Retirees swapping stories. Cats batting at toys in the playroom. Always, she said. Maplewood runs on caffeine and catnip. He grinned. I can see why. Helen slid the mocha across the counter. Here you go. He took a sip, eyes widening. Wow, that's incredible. Helen felt a ridiculous swell of pride. Trade secret. Mind if I sit? He asked, nodding toward the corner table. Go ahead, she said, trying to sound casual. Trying not to notice Edna giving her a thumbs up like a covert operative. As Alex settled in, Helen forced herself to focus on work. But snippets of conversation drifted over, customers speculating about him, whispering theories like amateur detectives. Travel photographer, someone murmured. Maybe he's here for a story, another said. Or hiding from something, a third whispered dramatically. Helen rolled her eyes. Maplewood could turn a flat tire into a conspiracy. Still, curiosity tugged at her. Why was he really here? Beyond the broken transmission, beyond the easy smile, she didn't have long to wonder. A sudden shriek shattered the hum of chatter. Helen spun to see a cat, Mr. Whiskers, of course, darting out of the playroom like a furry missile. Behind him, the door gaped open. Oh no, Helen muttered, vaulting over the counter. Marcy, I thought it was latched. Marcy wailed, chasing after her. Helen sprinted after the escapee, weaving through tables like a woman possessed. Mr. Whiskers zigzagged toward the pastry case, then launched onto a shelf of mugs, sending ceramic clattering like dominoes. Stop! Helen cried, which was laughable because cats didn't do commands. Cats did chaos. She lunged and collided with a chair. Pain shot up her shin. She bit back a curse, hopping awkwardly as Mr. Whiskers made a break for the door. And then, because fate had claws, Alex stepped into the fray. He scooped up the cat mid-leap, cradling him like a pro. Mr. Whiskers blinked, stunned, then began to purr like a tiny engine. Helen skidded to a halt, breathless. How? Fast reflexes, Alex said, grinning. And maybe he likes me. Helen stared, torn between gratitude and something else, something warm and unsettling. You're hired. He laughed, handing over the cat. Their fingers brushed, just a whisper of contact, but it sent a spark racing up Helen's arm. Careful, he said softly. You might make me stay. Helen's breath caught. She opened her mouth, then closed it, because words had abandoned her. Marcy appeared, wide-eyed. That was heroic. Alex shrugged. Easy. Just doing my part. Helen cradled Mr. Whiskers, heart thudding. Thanks, she managed. Really? No problem, he said, then added with a wink. But I expect hazard pay. Helen laughed, because what else could she do? But as she returned the cat to the playroom and restored order, one thought kept circling like a persistent kitten. Alex wasn't just passing through. He was becoming part of her story, and that terrified her more than any runaway cat. Chapter 4. Coffee and Confessions. Helen Carlisle had always believed that coffee could fix almost anything. Bad moods, sleepless nights, even heartbreak. But as she wiped down the counter that afternoon, she wasn't sure a latte could fix the flutter in her chest every time Alex walked through the door. He was back again. Third day in a row. Same camera, same storm gray eyes, same easy smile that made her feel like she'd forgotten how to breathe. He ordered his usual, black coffee, strong, but lingered near the counter instead of retreating to his corner table. Busy day? He asked, leaning casually against the display case. Helen glanced around. The cafe was humming with its usual symphony. Steam hissing, cats meowing, customers laughing, but nothing she couldn't handle. Always, she said, sliding his cup across. Maplewood doesn't sleep. It just drinks coffee. Alex chuckled. And plays with cats. Obviously, Helen said, nodding toward the playroom where Mr. Whiskers was sprawled like a furry emperor. They run the town. Alex followed her gaze, smiling. I think he likes me. Helen snorted. He likes anyone with opposable thumbs and a warm lap. Still, Alex said, eyes twinkling. I'll take the compliment. Helen tried to ignore the way her stomach flipped. She busied herself with the pastry case, rearranging muffins that didn't need rearranging. But Alex didn't move. He just watched her with that calm, curious expression that made her feel seen. So, he said after a moment, how'd you end up running a cat cafe in the middle of nowhere? Helen blinked. Middle of nowhere? He grinned. Okay, fine. Middle of charming small-town America. She laughed, shaking her head. Better. But the question lingered, and for some reason, she answered honestly. I always loved coffee. And cats. After college, I worked in a corporate office for a few years, hated every second. So I saved up, bought this old bookstore, and turned it into something I actually care about. Alex's brows lifted. That's brave. Helen shrugged, though pride warmed her chest. Or stupid. Brave, he said firmly. Most people don't chase what they love. Helen met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to gray eyes and the scent of coffee. She looked away, flustered. What about you? Why photography? Alex's smile softened. Because it's the closest thing to magic I know. You freeze a moment, one heartbeat, and it lasts forever. Helen felt that like a physical touch. That's beautiful. He shrugged, almost shy. Started when I was a kid. My dad gave me his old camera. I never stopped. Helen wanted to ask more. About his dad. About the places he'd seen. But before she could, Edna swooped in like a hawk spotting prey. Alex, darling, she sang, ignoring Helen's silent plea for mercy. You simply must come to the fundraiser. Alex blinked. Fundraiser. For the shelter cats, Edna said, eyes sparkling. Helen's organizing it. Music, raffles, costumes. Oh, it'll be divine. Helen groaned. Edna, what? Edna said innocently. You need volunteers. Alex smiled, slow and easy. Count me in. Helen stared. You don't even know what you're signing up for. Doesn't matter, he said. Sounds fun. Edna beamed. See? Fate. Helen shot her a look that promised retribution. But Edna just winked and floated away like a smug fairy godmother. Alex chuckled. She's persistent. She's dangerous, Helen muttered. But she couldn't help smiling. For the next hour, the cafe buzzed with its usual rhythm. But Helen felt something different. A thread of connection weaving between her and Alex, pulling tighter with every glance, every shared smile. When the rush finally eased, she found herself drifting toward his table, wiping down counters that didn't need wiping. He looked up, camera in hand. Want to see something? Helen hesitated, then nodded. He turned the screen toward her. A photo filled the frame. The cafe bathed in golden light, cats lounging like royalty, customers laughing over steaming mugs. It looked magical, like something out of a storybook. Wow, she whispered. You made us look amazing. You already are, he said softly. Helen's breath caught. Compliments were fine. She could handle compliments. But that tone, warm, sincere, made her feel like he saw more than just a quirky coffee shop. She straightened, flustered. Well, thanks. Alex smiled, then tilted his head. You ever think about leaving? Helen blinked. Leaving? Maplewood, he said. Seeing the world. Helen laughed a little too quickly. I barely have time to see the grocery store. I'm serious, he said. You've built something incredible here. But don't you ever wonder what else is out there? Helen hesitated. Because yes, sometimes late at night she wondered. Wondered what it would be like to wake up somewhere new, to taste coffee in Paris, to watch sunsets in Santorini. But dreams were expensive, and reality was bills and payroll and cat food. I like it here, she said finally. It's home. Alex studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But something in his eyes, something wistful, made her wonder if he understood her answer, or if he was already thinking about the next horizon. Before she could ask, the bell above the door jingled, and a gust of cold air swept in. Helen turned to greet the newcomers, but her mind stayed tangled in questions she couldn't quite name. Questions like, why did his smile feel like sunlight? Why did his voice linger like a melody? And why, for the first time in years, did she feel like maybe, just maybe, home wasn't the only place she belonged? Chapter 5. The fundraiser fiasco. Helen Carlisle had organized plenty of events before. Holiday specials, latte art contests, even a cats and costumes Halloween bash that nearly broke the internet. But the upcoming fundraiser for the local animal shelter? This was different, bigger, riskier, and thanks to Edna's relentless matchmaking, now featuring one storm-eyed photographer who made Helen's pulse behave like a caffeinated squirrel. The cafe was buzzing with anticipation. Flyers plastered the windows. Adopt Love, Cat Cafe fundraiser, Saturday night. Music, raffles, and more. Helen stood behind the counter, checklist in hand, trying not to panic. She had volunteers, decorations, raffle prizes, and a playlist that screamed quirky charm. What she didn't have was a plan for the costume contest Edna had insisted on. People love costumes, Edna had declared, eyes gleaming, and Alex will look divine in cat ears. Helen had laughed nervously, hoping Edna was joking. She wasn't. Now, as Helen arranged trays of pastries, the bell jingled, and in walked Alex, camera slung across his chest, smile easy as ever. He looked like trouble wrapped in flannel and denim. Ready for the big night? He asked, leaning on the counter like he owned the place. Helen groaned. Define ready. He grinned. You look like someone who color-coded a spreadsheet. I did, she admitted, and then burned it when Edna added costume contest in glitter pen. Alex laughed, warm and rich. Sounds fun. Fun for who? Helen muttered, then sighed. You're still volunteering? Absolutely, he said. What do you need me to do? Helen hesitated. She needed someone to handle photos for the adoption board, someone to wrangle raffle tickets, someone to keep Edna from turning the event into a speed dating mixer. But what came out was costume. Alex blinked. Costume? Helen winced. Edna signed you up for the contest. His mouth curved into a slow, wicked smile. What kind of costume are we talking? Helen swallowed. Cat ears. Maybe whiskers. Alex chuckled. You want me to wear whiskers? I don't want anything, Helen said quickly. Edna does. Then Edna gets whiskers, he said, eyes twinkling. And maybe a tail. Helen's cheeks flamed. You're enjoying this. Immensely, he said, then leaned closer, voice dropping to a teasing murmur. You could wear whiskers too. For solidarity. Helen's brain short-circuited. What no? He grinned, clearly delighted by her fluster. Think about it. Before Helen could respond, Marcy appeared, arms full of balloons. Helen, where do you want these? Anywhere, Helen said, grateful for the distraction. Just festive. As Marcy bustled off, Helen turned back to Alex, only to find him snapping photos of the cafe, the cats, the sunlight streaming through the windows. He moved with easy grace, like he belonged here, like he'd always belonged. And that thought was dangerous. Saturday night arrived like a whirlwind. The cafe was transformed. Twinkling lights strung across the ceiling, tables draped in colorful cloths, raffle baskets piled high with goodies. Cats lounged in the playroom, blissfully unaware of the chaos. People poured in, families, couples, students, all buzzing with excitement. Helen darted from table to table, checking tickets, refilling coffee, answering questions. She was a blur of neon cat ears and nervous energy. Breathe, darling, Edna said, sweeping past in a sequin sweater. It's perfect. Helen wasn't convinced. The music was too loud, the raffle tickets were tangled, and someone had spilled cider near the pastry case. But people were laughing, cats were purring, and donations were piling up. Maybe, just maybe, it was working. Then Alex walked in, and Helen forgot how to breathe. He wore a black t-shirt, jeans, and, God help her, cat ears perched on his head, whiskers drawn across his cheeks, a tail clipped to his belt. And somehow, impossibly, he looked good. Too good. Helen stared. You actually did it. He grinned, flashing dimples that should be illegal. Told you I'd commit. Helen swallowed hard. You look ridiculous. Ridiculously handsome? He teased. Helen rolled her eyes, but her cheeks burned. Go take pictures. Yes, ma'am, he said, saluting before melting into the crowd. Helen tried to focus on her duties, but every time she glanced up, there he was, laughing with guests, snapping photos of kids cuddling kittens, crouching to capture a perfect shot of Mr. Whiskers' mid-pounce. He looked happy, like he belonged here, and that thought was even more dangerous than before. The costume contest was chaos incarnate. Cats in tutus, toddlers in tiger stripes, adults in elaborate feline ensembles. Helen stood on a chair, trying to restore order while Edna worked the crowd like a carnival barker. "Vote for your favorite," Edna cried, waving a glittery clipboard. "Don't forget Alex. He's our mystery cat." Helen groaned. Alex, of course, hammed it up, posing with exaggerated elegance, tail flicking like a diva. The crowd roared with laughter. Helen wanted to laugh too, but her heart was doing somersaults. When the votes were tallied, Alex came in second, beaten by a 6-year-old dressed as a rainbow unicorn cat hybrid. He accepted defeat with mock solemnity, bowing to his tiny rival. Helen couldn't stop smiling. By the time the fundraiser ended, they'd raised more money than Helen had dared hope. Cats were adopted, raffle prizes claimed, and the cafe glowed with the warmth of community. Helen stood behind the counter, exhausted but exhilarated. When Alex appeared, camera slung, whiskers smudged, smile easy. "Successful night," he said. "Thanks to you," Helen replied. He shrugged. "Thanks to you. This place, it's special." Helen felt that like a touch. "It's home." Alex studied her, gray eyes soft. "You ever think about what else could feel like home?" Helen's breath caught. She opened her mouth, then closed it because words were dangerous. Feelings were dangerous. Before she could speak, Marcy called, "Helen, we need help with the raffle table." Helen turned away, heart pounding. But as she walked toward the chaos, one thought lingered like a whisper. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. And maybe, just maybe, that person was wearing cat ears. Chapter 6. Sparks and Setbacks. Helen Carlisle had always believed that the aftermath of a big event was the quietest part, the calm after the storm. But the morning after the fundraiser, the cat cafe was anything but calm. The bell jingled every 5 seconds. Customers streamed in with congratulations, and Edna was holding court at her usual table, regaling anyone who would listen with tales of Maplewood's most romantic night. Helen tried to ignore her, focusing on the espresso machine like it was a lifeline. She was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep and sheer willpower. But the fundraiser had been a success, more than she'd dared hope. Donations overflowed, cats found homes, and the cafe had never felt more alive. And then there was Alex. Helen had spent half the night replaying moments she shouldn't. His laugh, his smile, the way he'd looked at her when the lights twinkled overhead. It was ridiculous. She barely knew him. He was temporary, a traveler, a man with horizons in his eyes. So why did her heart leap when the bell jingled and he walked in? He looked unfairly good for someone who'd been up as late as she had. Hair tousled, camera slung across his chest. That easy smile that made her knees consider mutiny. "Morning," he said, voice warm as fresh coffee. Helen managed to smile. "Morning. Black coffee? Surprise me," he said, leaning on the counter like he had all the time in the world. Helen busied herself with the machine, trying to ignore the way her pulse sped up. "You're making a habit of this," she said lightly. "Maybe I like habits," he replied. Helen swallowed hard. Dangerous territory. She slid the cup across the counter. "Here you go." He took a sip, eyes crinkling. "Perfect." Before Helen could retreat to the safety of pastry trays, Edna swooped in like a hawk spotting prey. "Alex, darling," she sang. "You were marvelous last night. The whiskers, the tail. Oh, the crowd adored you." Alex chuckled. "Glad I could help." "And Helen?" Edna added, eyes twinkling. "You two made quite the team." Helen groaned inwardly. "Edna." "What?" Edna said innocently. "I'm just stating facts." Helen shot her a look that promised retribution, but Edna floated away, smug as ever. Alex grinned. "She's relentless. She's dangerous," Helen muttered, but she couldn't help smiling. The morning rush ebbed, leaving the cafe in a rare lull. Helen wiped down the counter, grateful for the quiet, until Alex appeared at her elbow, camera in hand. "Got a minute?" he asked. Helen hesitated. "Depends." He tilted the screen toward her. "Wanted to show you these." Photos filled the frame, snapshots from the fundraiser. Kids cuddling kittens, couples laughing over coffee, Edna mid-speech with glitter in her hair. And then one that made Helen's breath catch. Her, behind the counter, head thrown back in laughter, neon cat ears askew. She looked happy, radiant, like someone who belonged exactly where she was. "Wow," she whispered. "You made us look amazing." "You already are," he said softly. Helen's heart did a somersault. She looked away, flustered. "Thanks." Alex studied her for a moment, then said, "You ever think about doing more with this place? Expanding? Opening another cafe?" Helen blinked. "Another cafe? Why not?" he said. "You've built something incredible. People love it." Helen laughed a little too quickly. "I barely survived this one." "Still," he said, eyes thoughtful. "You could." Helen wanted to argue, but the idea lodged in her mind like a seed. She shook it off. "You think big. Always, he said. Comes with the job. Helen smiled faintly. Must be nice, seeing the world. Alex's expression shifted, something wistful flickering in his eyes. It is. Most of the time. Helen hesitated. Most of the time? He shrugged. Sometimes it gets lonely. Helen felt that like a touch. I get that, she said softly. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to gray eyes and the scent of coffee. The air hummed with something electric, something dangerous. And then, because fate had claws, a cat leapt onto the espresso machine. Helen yelped, lunging to grab it. The machine hissed, steam billowed, and in the chaos, her hands slipped, sending a cascade of milk across the counter and onto Alex's shirt. Oh my God! Helen grabbed napkins, mortified. I'm so sorry. Alex laughed, deep and easy. You really like spilling things on me. Helen dabbed at his shirt, cheeks flaming. I swear, this never happens. Sure, he teased. You sabotage all your customers? She met his eyes, and for a moment, laughter tangled with something warmer, something that made her heart race. Then Marcy called, Helen, we're out of oat milk. Helen stepped back, flustered. Duty calls. Alex smiled, lifting his cup. Thanks for the coffee and the entertainment. As he walked away, Helen pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the wild rhythm of her heart, because sparks were flying. And sparks, Helen knew, could burn. Chapter 7. The storm. Helen Carlisle loved storms. When she was home, curled up with a blanket and a book, cats purring like tiny engines around her. She did not love storms when she was stuck in the cat cafe at closing time, staring out the window as rain lashed the glass and wind howled like a banshee. The fundraiser had been 2 nights ago, but the cafe still buzzed with leftover energy and leftover mess. Helen had stayed late to reorganize shelves and mop floors, hoping to beat the weather. She hadn't. The storm rolled in fast, turning Maplewood's streets into rivers and the sky into a bruised swirl of gray. She sighed, flipping the lock on the door. Great. Just great. Looks like you're stuck, a voice said behind her. Helen jumped, heart leaping into her throat. She spun, and there he was, Alex, leaning against the counter like he belonged there, camera slung across his chest, hair damp from the rain. His smile was warm, easy, and entirely too distracting. Alex, she said, pressing a hand to her chest. You scared me. Sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. I was across the street when the rain hit. Figured I'd wait it out here. Helen glanced at the window. Sheets of rain blurred the world outside. You might be waiting a while. Fine by me, he said, shrugging off his jacket. Water droplets clung to his shoulders, glistening like tiny diamonds. Helen looked away before her brain short-circuited. Coffee? She asked, because coffee was safe. Coffee was neutral. Always, he said, settling into a chair near the window. Surprise me. Helen busied herself with the machine, trying to ignore the hum of tension in the air. The cafe was quiet now, just the hiss of steam, the patter of rain, and the occasional meow from the playroom. Cozy, intimate, dangerous. She brought the cup to his table, fingers brushing his as she set it down. A spark shot up her arm, quick and sharp. She pulled back like she'd touched fire. Thanks, he said, eyes crinkling as he took a sip. Perfect, as always. Helen smiled faintly, then perched on the edge of the chair across from him, because standing felt awkward, and leaving felt impossible. For a moment, they just listened to the storm. Rain hammered the windows, wind rattled the panes, thunder growled in the distance. The world outside was chaos. Inside, it was warm and still and humming with something Helen couldn't name. Alex broke the silence first. You ever get storms like this often? Sometimes, Helen said. Maplewood likes drama. He chuckled. Seems fitting. Helen tilted her head. Fitting? For you, he said, eyes twinkling. You run a cafe full of cats and neon ears. Drama suits you. Helen laughed, shaking her head. I'm not dramatic. Sure, he teased. You only sprinted across the cafe like an Olympic hurdler to catch a cat. Helen groaned. Don't remind me. I liked it, he said softly. Helen blinked. You liked watching me chase a cat? I liked watching you care, he said, voice low. You put your whole heart into this place. Helen's breath caught. Compliments were fine. She could handle compliments. But that tone, warm, sincere, made her feel like he saw more than just a quirky coffee shop owner. She looked away, flustered. It's my dream, she said quietly. Took me years to build it. And you did, he said. It's incredible. Helen swallowed hard. Thanks. For a moment silence stretched, comfortable but charged. Then Alex leaned back, studying her with that calm, curious gaze that made her feel like a puzzle he wanted to solve. You ever think about what's next? He asked. Helen frowned. Next? Beyond this, he said, gesturing around the cafe. You've built something amazing. But do you ever wonder what else is out there? Helen hesitated. Because yes, sometimes late at night she wondered. Wondered what it would be like to wake up somewhere new, to taste coffee in Paris, to watch sunsets in Santorini. But dreams were expensive, and reality was bills and payroll and cat food. I like it here, she said finally. It's home. Alex nodded slowly. Fair enough. But something in his eyes, something wistful, made her wonder if he understood her answer, or if he was already thinking about the next horizon. Thunder cracked, sharp and sudden. Helen jumped. Alex smiled. Not a fan of storms? He teased. I'm fine, she said, though her heart was racing. Come here, he said gently, patting the seat beside him. Helen blinked. What? Just sit, he said. You look like you're about to bolt. Helen hesitated, then moved, because her legs seemed to have a mind of their own. She slid into the chair beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his body, close enough to smell rain and coffee and something warm and clean that was entirely Alex. For a moment they just sat, listening to the storm. Then Alex spoke, voice low. You know, he said, I didn't plan on staying here. Maplewood was supposed to be a pit stop. Helen swallowed. And now, he looked at her, gray eyes soft. Now I'm not sure I want to leave. Helen's breath caught. Words tangled in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it because what could she say? That her heart was pounding like a drum? That she wanted him to stay, even though she shouldn't? Before she could speak, lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the lights flickered, then died. Helen gasped. The cafe plunged into darkness, broken only by the glow of streetlights outside and the soft gleam of Alex's phone screen. Well, he said, voice warm with amusement. Guess we're really stuck now. Helen laughed. Because what else could she do? Perfect. Alex grinned. Could be worse. Could it? She teased. Sure, he said. We could be stuck somewhere without coffee. Helen laughed again, tension melting like sugar in hot milk. And as the storm raged outside, as the cafe hummed with quiet and shadows, Helen realized something. She wasn't afraid of the storm. Not anymore, because Alex was here, and that felt like safety, like warmth, like the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name, but couldn't stop wanting. Chapter 8. Complications. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Maplewood washed clean and glittering under a pale winter sun. Helen Carlisle stood behind the counter of the Cat Cafe, trying to shake off the memory of last night, the flicker of candlelight, the hum of rain, the warmth of Alex sitting close enough to touch. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his smile, heard his voice, felt the quiet intimacy of that moment when the world outside had disappeared and it was just them, sharing coffee and confessions in the dark. And now, as the bell jingled and Alex walked in, her heart did that ridiculous somersault again. He looked unfairly good for someone who'd spent the night in a storm. Hair tousled, jacket slung casually over one shoulder, camera hanging like an extension of himself. His smile was easy, but there was something in his eyes, something thoughtful, almost heavy. Morning, he said, voice warm as fresh coffee. Helen managed to smile. Morning. Black coffee? Surprise me, he said, leaning on the counter like he had all the time in the world. Helen busied herself with the machine, trying to ignore the way her pulse sped up. You're making a habit of this? She teased lightly. Maybe I like habits, he replied, and the way he said it, soft, almost deliberate, made her breath catch. She slid the cup across the counter. Here you go. He took a sip, eyes crinkling. Perfect. For a moment silence stretched, comfortable but charged. Then Alex spoke, voice low. I got an email this morning, he said. Helen blinked. Okay. From my editor, he continued. They want me in Morocco. Photography assignment. 2 months. Helen's heart dropped like a stone. Morocco. 2 months. Far away. Oh, she said, because words had abandoned her. Alex studied her, gray eyes searching. I haven't said yes yet. Helen swallowed hard. Why not? He shrugged, but the movement was tight, almost restless. Because, I'm not sure I want to leave. Helen's breath caught. The cafe hummed around them. Steam hissing, cats meowing, customers laughing. But it all felt distant, muffled, like the world had narrowed to this moment. You don't owe me an explanation, she said quietly. Maybe I want to give you one, he said, voice soft. Helen looked away, flustered. Alex. He leaned closer, elbows on the counter, eyes steady. I like it here, Helen. More than I expected. Helen's heart thudded painfully. She wanted to say something, anything. But before she could, the bell jingled and Edna swept in like a glittery hurricane. Morning, darlings, she sang, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Helen, the fundraiser was the talk of the town. And Alex, oh, you were a sensation. Helen forced a smile. Thanks, Edna. Edna beamed. Now, about the Valentine's event, Helen groaned. Edna. But Edna was already off and running, outlining plans for heart-shaped cookies and romantic cat adoptions. Helen barely heard her. Her mind was spinning, tangled in questions she couldn't untangle. Alex. Morocco. 2 months. When Edna finally floated away, Helen turned back to Alex, but he was gone. His coffee sat on the counter half-finished. Helen stared at it, heart aching in a way she didn't want to name. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Helen smiled, chatted, made lattes, but inside, she was a storm. Every time the bell jingled, her heart leapt, hoping it was him. It wasn't. By closing time, she was exhausted, physically, emotionally, everything. She locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the quiet cafe, staring at the playroom where Mr. Whiskers batted lazily at a toy. She loved this place, loved the cats, the coffee, the laughter. It was her dream, her home. So why did it suddenly feel incomplete? Her phone buzzed. A text. Alex, sorry I left so fast. Needed air. Can we talk tomorrow? Helen stared at the screen, heart pounding. Talk. Tomorrow. She typed back before she could overthink it. Helen, sure. And as she slipped her phone into her pocket, one thought lingered like a whisper. Tomorrow could change everything. Chapter 9. The grand gesture. Helen Carlisle had never hated mornings before. She loved the ritual, the hiss of the espresso machine, the scent of fresh beans, the soft purr of cats greeting the day. But this morning, everything felt wrong. Because today Alex was leaving. She didn't know for sure, but she felt it in her bones. His text last night, can we talk tomorrow, had been a warning bell. And now, as she unlocked the cafe and flipped the lights on, her stomach churned like a storm. She tried to focus on work. Muffins arranged, beans ground, milk steamed. But her mind kept circling back to him. His smile, his laugh, the way he'd looked at her during the storm like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The bell jingled, and Helen's heart leapt, then sank when it wasn't him. Just a regular customer, chatting about the weather. She smiled, nodded, made their latte. All on autopilot. By mid-morning, the cafe was buzzing, but Helen felt like she was moving through fog. Every time the door opened, her pulse spiked. Every time it wasn't Alex, disappointment crashed like a wave. And then, finally, the bell jingled and there he was. Alex. Storm gray eyes, camera slung across his chest, jacket zipped against the chill. His smile was faint, almost hesitant. Morning, he said, voice softer than usual. Helen swallowed hard. Morning. Coffee? Yeah, he said, leaning on the counter. Black. She busied herself with the machine, hands trembling. So, Morocco. He exhaled slowly. I said yes. Helen's heart dropped like a stone. She forced a smile that felt brittle. Congratulations. Thanks, he said quietly. It's a big opportunity. Of course, she said, because what else could she say? Don't go? Stay here? Stay with me? He studied her, gray eyes searching. Helen. She shook her head, cutting him off before the words could break her. It's fine, Alex. Really. You're a traveler. That's who you are. His jaw tightened. That's not all I am. Helen looked away, blinking hard. You should go. You'll miss your flight. Silence stretched thick, heavy, aching. Then Alex nodded slowly, picked up his coffee, and walked out the door. Helen stood frozen, heart splintering like glass. The rest of the day was a blur. Helen smiled, chatted, made lattes, but inside, she was hollow. Every laugh felt forced, every word tasted like ash. By closing time, she was alone in the cafe, staring at the playroom where Mr. Whiskers batted lazily at a toy. She loved this place, loved the cats, the coffee, the laughter. It was her dream, her home. So why did it feel so empty? She sank into a chair, head in her hands. She told herself she didn't need anyone, that love was a distraction, that she was fine on her own. But Alex had changed everything, and now he was gone. Her phone buzzed. A text. Edna. Darling, come outside. Now. Helen frowned. Why? Edna. Just trust me. Helen sighed, grabbed her coat, and stepped into the cold night, and froze. Because there, in the middle of Maplewood's tiny square, under strings of twinkling lights, stood Alex, holding a sign. A ridiculous, glitter-covered sign that read, Stay for coffee? Helen blinked. What is this? Alex grinned, sheepish and breathtaking all at once. A grand gesture. Edna's idea. Helen stared. You're supposed to be on a plane. I canceled, he said simply. Helen's heart stuttered. You what? I couldn't leave, he said, stepping closer. Not without telling you the truth. Helen swallowed hard. Which is? That I don't want Morocco, he said, voice low and steady. I want this. You. Whatever this is. Helen's breath caught. Alex. I know it's crazy, he said, eyes searching hers. I've spent years chasing horizons, but for the first time I want to stay. Because you, Helen Carlisle, you feel like home. Helen's throat tightened. Words tangled, useless. So she did the only thing that made sense. She kissed him. Right there, under the lights, with Edna cheering and George snapping photos and half the town pretending not to watch. And it was perfect. Warm and sweet and dizzying. Like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Alex cupped her face, gray eyes shining. So, stay for coffee? Helen smiled, tears pricking her eyes. Always, As they walked back to the cafe hand in hand, Helen felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, because maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. And maybe, just maybe, that person was wearing cat ears. Chapter 10. Happily Ever After with Cats. Helen Carlisle had always believed that life didn't come with neat endings. There were bills, broken espresso machines, cats that refused to stay in their playroom. But as she unlocked the cat cafe the next morning, sunlight spilling across the worn wooden floors, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace and joy, because Alex was staying. She still couldn't quite believe it. Last night felt like a dream. Twinkling lights, glittery signs, Edna cheering like a sports fan, and Alex's lips on hers, warm and sure and everything she hadn't known she needed. Now, as she arranged muffins in the pastry case, the bell jingled, and there he was. Alex, storm gray eyes, camera slung across his chest, smile easy and bright. He wore no whiskers today, no tail, but Helen swore he still looked like trouble wrapped in denim and charm. Morning, he said, voice warm as fresh coffee. Helen grinned. Morning. Black coffee? Surprise me, he said, leaning on the counter like he had all the time in the world. Helen busied herself with the machine, heart humming like a happy tune. So, she said lightly, you canceled Morocco. Yep, he said. Told my editor I found a better assignment. Helen raised a brow. Which is? He smiled, slow and wicked. Documenting the most charming cat cafe in America. Helen laughed, shaking her head. That's not a real assignment. Sure it is, he said. I just made it one. She slid the cup across the counter. You're ridiculous. And you love it, he teased. Helen rolled her eyes, but her cheeks warmed. Maybe. The day unfolded like magic. Customers streamed in, buzzing with gossip about last night's grand gesture. Edna and George held court at their usual table, smug as cats with cream. Darling, Edna whispered when Helen passed by. You two are the talk of the town. Helen groaned. Edna, what? Edna said innocently. I'm just stating facts. Helen shot her a look, but Edna only winked and offered Mr. Whiskers a pinch of catnip. By afternoon, the cafe was humming with laughter and warmth. Alex moved through the crowd like he belonged, snapping photos of kids cuddling kittens, couples sharing lattes, sunlight streaming through frosted windows. Every so often, his gaze found Helen, and her heart did that ridiculous somersault all over again. When the rush eased, he joined her behind the counter, camera dangling from his neck. Got a minute? He asked. Helen smiled. For you? Maybe. He tilted the screen toward her. Photos filled the frame, snapshots of the cafe, the cats, the fundraiser, the stormlit night, and then one that made her breath catch. Her, laughing behind the counter, neon cat ears askew, eyes bright with joy. You made me look, she whispered. Happy. You are, he said softly. Helen swallowed hard. Alex. He set the camera down, took her hand, and laced their fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. I meant what I said, he murmured. I want to stay, not just for now, for good. Helen's breath caught. You what? I've spent years chasing horizons, he said, gray eyes steady. But for the first time, I want roots. I want mornings that smell like coffee and sound like cats. I want you. Helen blinked back tears, laughter bubbling up like champagne. You're sure? Positive, he said, smiling. Already signed a lease. Helen stared. You what? For the studio, he said. Across the square. Photography and coffee breaks. Perfect combo. Helen laughed, giddy and breathless. You're insane. Insanely in love, he said, and kissed her. Soft and sweet and dizzying, like the first sip of caramel mocha on a cold morning. Epilogue. 6 months later, the cat cafe was busier than ever. Cats adopted, lattes flowing, laughter spilling through the doors like sunlight. A new sign hung in the window. Cat cafe and photography studio. Love, lattes and catnip. Helen stood behind the counter, neon ears perched jauntily on her head, watching Alex snap photos of a couple cuddling a kitten. He looked happy, truly, deeply happy, and so did she. Edna and George sat at their usual table, sipping tea and grinning like proud grandparents. Darling, Edna said, waving Helen over. We told you fate had claws. Helen laughed, sliding into the seat beside them. You were right. George winked. We usually are. Helen glanced at Alex, heart swelling. She'd spent years building her dream, thinking it was enough. And it was, until love walked in wearing cat ears and a smile that felt like home. Now her dream was bigger, brighter, filled with laughter and coffee and cats, and a man who made her believe in happily ever after. Because maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. And maybe, just maybe, that person was standing in her cafe, camera in hand, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Helen smiled, heart full to bursting. Always, she whispered. And it was. Alex had never believed in roots. For years, his life had been a blur of airports and hotel rooms, sunrises in foreign cities, and the constant hum of departure boards. He loved it, The thrill of chasing horizons, the rush of capturing fleeting beauty through his lens. But somewhere along the way, the thrill had started to feel hollow. He didn't realize how hollow until Maplewood. Until her. Alex stood in the doorway of the Cat Café, camera slung across his chest, watching Helen laugh as she wiped down the counter. Neon cat ears perched on her head like a crown, sunlight spilling across her hair in a halo of gold. She looked like home, and that terrified him at first, because home wasn't in his vocabulary. Home was a hotel room with a view, a suitcase half-packed, a passport tucked in his pocket. Home was temporary, but Helen changed that. He remembered the first time he saw her, standing behind the counter, steam curling around her like magic, eyes bright with warmth and something fierce. She'd smiled at him, and the world had tilted. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment, just a smile. Then came the fundraiser, the storm, the quiet confessions in the dark. The way she listened, really listened like his words mattered. The way she laughed, head thrown back, joy spilling out like sunlight. And suddenly, Morocco didn't matter. Paris didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this cafe, these cats, and the woman who made him believe in things he'd stopped believing in. Love, roots, forever. Alex lifted his camera, framing Helen in the lens. She looked up, caught him and rolled her eyes, but her smile was soft, secret, meant only for him. He snapped the photo anyway, because he wanted to keep this moment. All of them. He'd spent years freezing beauty in frames, chasing it across continents. But the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen was standing 10 feet away, laughing at a spilled latte. And she was his. Alex lowered the camera, heart full to bursting. He crossed the room, slid behind the counter, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. She stiffened for a second, then melted into him, warm and perfect. "Hey!" she murmured, voice soft. "Hey!" he whispered against her hair. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing each other in. Then Helen turned, eyes bright, and kissed him, slow and sweet, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. Alex smiled against her lips. "You know," he said, "I used to think home was a place." Helen tilted her head. "And now I know," he said, gray eyes steady on hers. "Home is you." Her breath hitched, and Alex felt something settle deep inside him. Something solid, something sure. He wasn't leaving. Not now, not ever. Because for the first time in his life, Alex wasn't chasing horizons. He'd found his forever, and it smelled like coffee and sounded like cats, and laughed like Helen Carlisle.